Now, lads, I want to move on to our special section of the programme this evening and talk about injuries. It's something that a lot of people are bringing up across World Rugby forums and that. And William is actually, we're delighted to have William on the show because he's actually he was a senior lecturer in anatomy, physiology and clinical health studies. William, just looking a little bit at injuries because there's so much stigma attached. Firstly, starting with basics really, and what causes major rugby injuries? And I guess a lot of players, younger players, they'll be wondering, can anything be done to lessen the effects and the occurrences of these injuries?
Yeah. Well, basically, there are two major factors. The first one is physical trauma or accident. You think of, a broken bone, a twisted knee, sprained ankle, cuts, abrasions that everybody comes off with on a Saturday afternoon with lumps and bumps and pretty minor things that go away once you've had a few pints afterwards. The really traumatic ones that are the result of impacts and collisions typically occur at such a speed that there's generally nothing you can do about it. So there are some things that you can do, and I'm going to talk about the factors that you can control and the factors that you can't. You can't control how someone else tackles you by and large, unless you're standing, prepared for the tackle, which is quite unusual in rugby. Remember also that the rules of most sports, particularly high-risk sports like rugby or American gridiron football and so on, are theoretically at least designed to minimize the possibility of risk. If the rules are followed, you would think that the risk would be lesser. That's not always true. Sometimes they change rules, or in the case of rugby, they change laws that in fact make the game possibly slightly more dangerous, possibly. So you've got the traumatic injuries that happen as a result of accident, but then you've also got other injuries that occur over a period of time. And these are identifiable problems that can in some cases be prevented. If you look at the other factors, there are extrinsic factors, those things that happen outside the body, and then there are intrinsic factors, things that are personal to the individual and to do with his or her physical makeup. If you look at the extrinsic factors, these are some things that you can have some control over and can use to lessen injuries. If you think about the human body, there were actually very frail individuals in the animal kingdom. Our spinal makeup is very poorly designed. We're not really designed to walk upright. If you look at every other major animal on the planet, they all walk on 4 limbs. Even birds, which walk on 2, actually their spines are usually parallel to the ground or heading towards parallel to the ground. So we do have a huge physiological problem, an anatomical problem in how we have evolved. The excessive loading that you get in rugby, sometimes you'd end up with maybe 3 times your own weight lying on top of you in a ruck. If you look at how scrums go down at the very top level, it's been said that it's exactly akin to being in a minor car crash. And you can see those guys, 6, 18-stone guys bashing into each other. And of course that's mirrored elsewhere. People mimic what they see happening at the top level. So you get it through the AIL, you get it in schools rugby and so on. So what can you do about that? Well, you have to train and get fit. That's one thing. We're going to come back to that in a moment. But remember, human tissues aren't accustomed to the forces that we're talking about here. So in order to withstand them, you have to prepare yourself. So what do? The other thing that you have to do is decide how often and for how long and how hard you're actually going to exercise in order to get yourself fit. And in order to do that correctly, you have to consider the impact on muscles and joints. In order to get no one in the right mind, for example, would come back to say after a 6-month layoff without any training and go straight into a major game of rugby. They'd be mad. So, in order to prepare yourself to make yourself as fit as possible and make yourself as immune as possible to injury, you need to get fit in the right way. So that's a sort of fitness issue and the accidental issue. The other things, of course, that you can control are the techniques that you use in any sport. We have overuse injuries. So if you're doing the same thing over and over again, but you're doing it wrong, you can end up damaging ligaments and tendons and joints and so on. If you look at overuse injuries, some of them are actually called after. You've got tennis elbow or golfer's elbow. For example, the tennis elbow is really medial epicondylitis because that's the structure of the elbow where the tendon becomes inflamed and so on. So repetition of certain things can lead to injury. The other thing, of course, is that in rugby, if you slip into doing things wrongly or badly, or you're coached badly, then, for example, tackling, most serious injuries are caused in the tackle. And depending on your age group, injuries actually vary according to the age group that you play in, quite interestingly. The one way that you really, really must prepare yourself is to have a coach who knows, who's up to date with the very knowledge of the game, the current sporting applications of training and so on. It's very difficult in an amateur sport like rugby. So they're sort of some of the extrinsic factors. Other ones, of course, are more obvious. Environmental conditions. I remember with great fondness a very great rugby player from Ulster called Dick Milligan, who played with the Lions alongside Mike Gibson in South Africa, and he had to give up rugby after taking part in an Ulster selection match, which is daft. He didn't have to play in it. He was going to be picked no matter what for one of the inter-pros, and they played this game, a trials game, on a mud heap at Ravenhill, and Dick shattered his ankle because of the muddy conditions, never played again. So environmental conditions are something that we take into consideration. And it's not just in rugby, it's any sport. No one in their right mind would play rugby on a frozen pitch, or a bone hard pitch in the summer. So, they're extrinsic factors. The other things that you have no control over, of course, are the other players that you're playing against. But again, going back to the injuries in rugby, most of them the serious ones are caused in tackles. Fewer than you think are actually caused by collapsing scrums and so on. Sadly, of course, sometimes there where the worst injuries occur. And in fact, the worst one I ever saw, apart from a neck injury, was a prop forward who broke his femur in a collapsing scrum. I have no idea how it occurred, but it was quite a horrendous injury to occur on the rugby pitch. At least I read a few posts on a board earlier on this week about equipment. Someone wanted to know what is the best equipment to use when you're playing rugby to protect yourself. Well, apart from a gum shield, the other thing, of course, is a decent set of boots that protect your feet and stop you getting blisters and so on. But apart from that, in rugby and something, a support to keep the family jewels comfortable, and a good thick sweater, that's about it. Some sports require better equipment. For example, if you're a marathon runner, you wouldn't ever dream of doing a marathon in a pair of €5 runners that you bought in a cheap shop somewhere.
Yeah.
You would get handmade shoes or whatever. Top rugby players, I'm sure, get their boots specially made. I remember again a guy who played for Ireland a few times, going back to my good time. It was a guy called Bill Brown, and he used to wear sprinting shoes, spikes, but instead of having spikes, he had the spikes removed and he had rugby studs inserted because he liked the lightness of the boots and so on. So that was the first time I'd ever heard of that. And of course, some people themselves individually may have certain characteristics about their physical makeup that can lead to injuries. For example, I don't know if you ever heard the term pronation. It's a term that is used in, when you're talking about your feet. And people, for example, who would be overpronate or roll their feet inwards, that can lead to all sorts of problems with the tendons and the ankles and so on. The last thing I should mention, I suppose, of this is that failure to warm up and to warm down before a game is really important. The body's tissues, particularly muscle tissue, respond better to the loading they're going to get when they're warm. The warm-up process, what it does, it infuses the muscles with blood and brings oxygen and glucose, or glycogen, I should say, to the muscles to provide them with the energy that they're going to use in that. And even at the end of it, it's better to warm down than to simply just stop and, have a shower and get dressed and go home. So there are some of the factors, but there are a whole host of other ones, like not everybody has legs that are the same length. That can cause a problem. You've got a muscle imbalance. Most people who are right-handed, for example, would have bigger muscles on the right side of their body because they're simply used to using that more than the left, or vice versa if you're left-handed.